My name is Salima Hashmi. I am the elder daughter of the Pakistani poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and I suppose he represents an age in which there was the movements for freedom, and I think most significantly the movements for social justice and for democratic rights through his writings as a journalist, as a poet, as a leading intellectual of Pakistan. By that time, by the time 71 came round, he was no longer in journalism. He was actually heading a college and an orphanage in one of the slum areas of Karachi. So he was really writing through his poetry. And around the same time, there was a letter, a public letter, which was drafted by Zafar Malik and friends, which outlined the position of 43, or was it 44, prominent intellectuals. And of course, he was one of the first people who they approached, and he signed it gladly. Lending his name to such a document, of course, immediately created waves, because otherwise that kind of a document might have gone unnoticed, because the first problem was, of course, how to get it published, how to make it, bring it into the public domain. So that was one level of his stating his position. The other position, which was much more what Faiz did and what he was known for, was of course his poetic response. And one of the first poems that he wrote, which is actually, the voice in it is quite savage. It's a poem which starts "Teh bateh dil ki kadurat," which talks about how the bitterness in the many layers of one's heart comes into one's eyes and takes the shape of blood. And then there is a description of how everything turns to blood. It was written on the 7th of April, 1971. And these poems, which were written at that time, they form a section in one of his collections. And they really describe the various stages that his poetic inspiration went through as details became a little clearer. Because, of course, you will remember those were the days before the internet. Consequently, facts were very sparse, and one gathered what one gathered from things like BBC radio or whatever. So he wrote the first poem on the massacre. As it became apparent that this is what had happened, was a poem which begins the first line, "Teh bateh dil ki kadurat," which describes the sun turning red with blood, with the pale light of moonlight turning red, with the flower on the blossom on the tree turning red, with everything turning red, which was red of running, river of blood. And the last two lines then, because Faiz, as you know, was a very optimistic poet. His voice is very lyrical, it's always very soft. He then asks for a flood of tears, which will wash away the red. So that was the first poem. And its significance was not lost on people who were reading him at the time, although there was quite a lot of bewilderment, because people were not sure of the facts, and the facts were hidden. They came through, his master's voice. Consequently, to sift through all of that and find that there was something that didn't ring true was quite a hard task for most people. And on the other hand, there were sure signs, like, for example, the Bengalis who were in public service in what was then West Pakistan, who were employees, were being interned, because it was obvious that they had chosen to side with what was going to be the new country. And we too had a colleague in Pakistan television who very tentatively inquired if we could be of help, which we were. We hid him in our house, and so we made sure. He just gave us one there was one request: don't ask, you know, who's going to take me away from here, how I will leave. I will disappear one day. Don't ask where I'm going or how I'm going. We respected that. Every morning I would take in his tray with his breakfast, and every afternoon, and so on. So wherever possible, these gestures were present. They were never documented because, you know, this was part of human values. And we had to do what we had to do. But certainly it was not a popular position on a wider scale. And consequently, there was harassment of all people. Certainly Faiz, because he was very high profile, the harassment was more social strictures. It was an observation by an intelligence man outside the door, phones that were tapped, mail that was intercepted, and all of us, people like us, we did undergo that. But still, there were columns written, usually went unpublished, but sometimes published. I still remember a column that was written by Javed Jabbar in a magazine like She magazine for women. And when I read that, and I, you know, read his absolutely clear views, I was so inspired. I said, you know, I shouldn't phone him because the phone will be tapped. Foolishly, I said, I'll send him a telegram and I'll tell him how remarkable this column was. And my husband said, you think that the telegram is going to be delivered? So I said, I don't know, but I want to send this telegram and tell him, shabash, you know, this is a very fine and very brave article that you've written. So there was that atmosphere of fear and of harassment, and somehow being in the minority in terms of one's views. But the real information came through in dribs and drabs. And for example, I got cuttings in an envelope which came from a friend in London. And the envelope had obviously been opened, but it had got to me. And I was truly shocked at the news and the coverage that I received, because there was nothing like that locally available. So perhaps people should understand that we did our best and we felt for you. I think the deciding factor, there were two deciding factors as far as I remember. It's a very long time ago now. But firstly, it was that there was a democratic process. And the democratic process should have been respected, and it should have been followed. So that was the first point. It should be remembered that Pakistan was under a military dictatorship. So the democratic process was, in a sense, quite a new thing. There was that. And the second thing was that you do not use your army against your own people. So that was the second, that was the cornerstone of, I think, the response, that you cannot justify that ever. And the two things put together, I think, were part of the position. And then, of course, as time went on in those months that followed, when so many other factors entered the picture, it became more and more clear that there was only one position as a thinking human being, as somebody who respected human life could take. The newspaper that published it was Azad, which was an independent newspaper, and I think headed by three of the most respected journalists in Pakistan, Hamid Akhtar, Abdullah Malik, and Ayir Rahman. And I think that their names were synonymous with progressive, independent, humane journalism. So it was basically stating the same things, that, you know, the people of East Pakistan have a right to express their views. They have the right to be, they are the majority. They have a right for governance to go to them. The Prime Minister has to be from the majority party, and so on and so forth, and that you cannot use force against to enforce undemocratic principles. I think this was a difficult issue. As I've said, those were times in which West Pakistan traditionally thought it was the center of power. Not surprisingly, we had been under 10 years of military dictatorship. The cantonments were in West Pakistan, you know, that was from where it was governed. So consequently, they felt that, you know, by divine right, it was theirs. So to allow it to shift away from the center of military was something unthinkable. And I think that people who represented law, like Zafar Malik did and upheld the law, there was a major issue with fighting with their conscience, and there was no way except to strike out for what they believed was right. The poem Hum Ke Tehre Ajnabi, which eventually became the sort of, I think, a bridge between the people of Bangladesh and Pakistan. It was written after my father had been to Dhaka and came back, and it so happened that he came straight to our house. And so I said, you know, how was it? How was the experience of going back to Dhaka? So he was very shaken, I must say, and deeply, I think deeply troubled for two reasons. Firstly, because, of course, he didn't realize the extent of loss. Because whoever he asked for among his friends was gone. The second thing was he was not prepared for the extent of bitterness. So this poem is really, it talks about that, you know, we who were once one, who were lovers, are now strangers. And interestingly, these lines that, you know, खून के धब्बे धुलेंगे कितनी बरसातों के बाद, it is used by people from India and Pakistan, Bangladesh and Pakistan, and I think it's something that can be used as a healing for all. He came as part of, he came as part of Bhutto's delegation because he was a cultural advisor. And I think that Bhutto made a smart move by requesting him to come. Abba was a little bit wary of it, but in the end he felt it was necessary because he felt his presence would actually be the kind of healer that he wanted it to be very much. And as I said, that two of his best poems resulted in that. He had been here a lot. He came here in his capacity as a journalist, of course. He came here in his capacity as a writer, as a poet. He also came here when he did the script and the songs for a film, Jago Hua Savera, which was in fact Pakistan's first international award-winning film. It was directed by A.J. Kardar, produced by Nauman Taseer, and my father did an adaptation from a Bengali novel and wrote the lyrics and wrote the dialogue. And for 2 months, he researched to find common words between Bengali and Urdu. The film was in Urdu, but it has a very minimal dialogue. But he researched so that he found the common words between Urdu and Bengali, and most of the dialogue was restricted to those words, so that it could easily be understood in what was then East Pakistan and what was West Pakistan. The film won the Golden whatever in Moscow. It won the award in Berlin. It won the Robert Flaherty Award. And in fact, it was very celebrated. It was premiered in 1958. At that point, my father was jailed by Ayub Khan. So at the premiere at the Everyman Theatre in London, I must say, take my hat off to her, the wife of the Pakistan High Commissioner, Mrs. Ikramullah, performed the opening ceremony. Very brave of her, as the wife of a government servant. And the film actually made a lot of waves. The cast was mostly amateur. It was from one of the fishing villages off the coast here. and it was made in a record, shot in 4 weeks' time by Walter Lasalle, one of the great cameramans of the 20th century, who's still alive, by the way. So the film has been re-released, and it is now doing the rounds. It was shown in Calcutta last year, and we are very keen that the film come to Dhaka and it be premiered here, because I think it might be yet again a possible bridge between Pakistan and Bangladesh, and certainly it will revive memories of very creative people who I think had great friendships and wonderful hopes for the future together. I think that one thing is very wonderful about this event, that is that perhaps for the first time it is people like Faiz and so many others, because there were so many others, whose contribution to what was happening and an understanding of what was happening was certainly present, it's documented, and it affected people. And I think it has made so many Pakistanis take a second look at their history. So for the people of Bangladesh, I think coming from them, it's a big thing for us, and it makes one happy because one feels that, okay, now is the moment to actually build on a relationship which does not necessarily look back, but now begins to look forward, and it's based on affection, friendship, and really a clear idea of how we remake these bonds.